With a shortage of HGV drivers to get goods into, out of and around the UK, should our immigration laws change to fix our supply chain issues? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome James Bielby, who is Chief Executive of the Federation of Wholesale Distributors. Hello, James, and a good friend of mine, Richard Tice, businessman and leader of Reform UK. Gents, welcome to the show. And James, can I ask you, first of all, do you think that we need to have a look at the rights of those who could potentially work more easily in this country?
I think so, yeah, because there's a massive shortage of labour, as you said. There's 100,000 HGV vacancies currently in the food and drink sector, which we represent. There's 500,000 vacancies. That's 13% of the total. And the government quite rightly say that we should be prioritising jobs for British people and paying British people more. But that doesn't happen overnight. And there is a real crisis that we're facing into right now in the run-up to Christmas. And we need some form of temporary fix. Not freedom of movement, that's gone. That's not coming back. But temporary visas to allow people from the EU to come into the UK and do those jobs where there's a shortage. And these are skilled roles. We're not just talking about people who, you could take any person who's unemployed and do that job. No. Drivers need training, sort of 3 to 6 months, costs quite a lot of money to train up drivers. Meat processors, there was a story in the news a couple of weeks ago about shortage of chicken in Nando's. That's because the skills aren't there, the people aren't there. And we absolutely agree that we should be looking to make secure, well-paid, skilled roles for British people in the future. But unfortunately, we need labour here and now.
Yes, I mean, as the Chief Executive of the Federation of Wholesale Distributors, can you give me a snapshot of how bad things are at the moment?
Yeah, it's really bad. As I said, there's 500,000 vacancies, and that's across growers, processors, manufacturers, distributors, then into retailers and the food service industry, so cafes, restaurants and pubs. Real shortage of staff. And it's very, very difficult to fill those roles because lots of areas of the country have full employment. People are choosing to do other jobs. Wages have gone up. So the average wage of a HGV driver has gone up by 10% this year. Some drivers are earning as much as £70,000. And what you'll find is that the need to maintain pay differentials means that all jobs in the food and drink supply chain will then have to have a wage increase, which will lead to food price inflation. We're already seeing that. The wholesale price of food has gone up hugely over the last few months. And that will mean that when people are getting paid more, they'll lose that money at the petrol pumps, they'll lose that money at the tills when they're buying food and drink.
And James, finally, before I come to Richard, why has this happened? Is Brexit a factor?
It is Brexit, but it's not primarily Brexit. It's COVID as much as anything, and then some tax changes that meant HGV drivers having to go on payroll rather than maintaining a self-employed status. And also, in terms of drivers, it's a difficult job, and people have perhaps been on furlough in COVID and thought they want to go and do something else. The average age of a HGV driver in the UK is 55. Just 1% of them are under 25. And that does need to be addressed. Absolutely agree that that's something that needs to be looked at. But it doesn't happen now. And we're facing into a crisis today, tomorrow, next week, and in the run-up to Christmas. We need people, and we need people now. Temporary fix, not freedom of movement. We're not bringing that back. We just want to fill those vacancies in the short term while we address those structural issues.
Richard Tice, great to have you on the show. What do you think the solution is to this problem?
I think the solution is that normal market forces apply, Mark. I mean, the reality is actually, firstly, there are shortages, I understand, of drivers across the whole of Europe. There are supply chain issues across the world, actually, as countries and nations, economies recover from COVID. But look, the reality is that actually HGV drivers, they were, in a sense, some of the people who didn't receive decent real wage growth in the last decade or so because of freedom of movement. Their wages were suppressed. And so now the good news is for them, they're part of the Brexit dividend, Mark, that I'm so delighted about, because actually now businesses have got to pay proper wages for these skills. And it's basic economics. If there's a shortage of labour, you've got two choices. You've either got to pay more wages or you've got to invest in capital equipment to replace the labour. Now, clearly with lorry drivers, pre-Tesla lorries, that's not going to happen. And so, yeah, I understand that actually businesses are beginning to adjust and for example, they are filling lorries fuller, they're adjusting delivery patterns, they're working out, what's essential. This is normal market forces. And I truly believe, Mark, that smart business people running great businesses, small, medium or large, they will very quickly work out ways to adjust and adapt. But the thing is, though, Mark, if you just give a temporary visa, you and I know, a bit like income tax, that was introduced 200 plus years ago, temporarily to pay for a war. Here we are 200 years later. This wouldn't be a temporary visa. There would always be another reason. This is a moment to hold firm and say, pay decent British HGV drivers a proper wage, and actually this will be sorted. And if it's a really skilled job, and it's a very responsible job, driving a big truck, down a motorway
very
is a
skilled.
really responsible job. Bluntly, businesses have got to pay up for that responsibility and for that skill. And I think it's not before time.
James, do you accept Richard's point? And Richard, I think, concerned there about the idea of free movement by the back door.
I agree with what he's saying, but you need to realise that can't happen instantly. There aren't enough bodies. We need people, and training people takes time. Just paying them more isn't enough. It's a skilled role. You can't just hand the keys to someone and say, drive this up to Scotland for me, and on the way back, can you process this chicken, please? It doesn't work like that. You need to train people up and give them the skills. Whilst we're doing all of the things that Richard says we need to do, and I agree with him on that, we need some temporary fix, and that it can only come from people who are already trained. There isn't enough people in the UK. 500,000 vacancies. That's 13% of the total workforce. It's a skilled role. You wouldn't take someone, let's say there was a shortage of news presenters, you wouldn't take someone off the street, stick them in front of the microphone and say, give me a tight 10 on the government social care policy. This is exactly the same. It's a skilled role. You need to train people to do that.
I think there are probably networks that would stoop to that level, but not GBNews, let me tell you, James. What is the immediate concern? I mean, what's the worst case scenario, James, if we don't resolve this issue?
Well, empty shelves at Christmas. We're already seeing shortage of meat products because there's no processors or insufficient processors to get turkeys ready, to get pigs in blankets ready. In a shortage of meat, so the Nando's closure, milkshakes, Haribo, a number of commodities are going to be in peril, and people won't have the choice at the supermarket shelves. But we will also see massive food price inflation. It's already happening. So hardworking British people will be paying more for their goods, paying more for when they eat out, paying more for food that they buy in the supermarkets. And Christmas is going to be really, really challenging this year because of some changes that are coming in on pre-notification, because of Brexit rules on October the 1st. We've already got problems associated with COVID, the hangover from that. So it needs to be addressed, because otherwise we're going to see major shortage of products in the run-up to Christmas.
And Richard, you're absolutely right to point out this is not a uniquely British problem, cannot be laid squarely at the door of Brexit. On the continent, they've got huge supply chain issues, particularly in Poland, I was reading this morning, and the United States are having problems as well. This is a global problem. But Richard, clearly the message from James there is that market forces will take 6 months, a year to kick in. What do we do now?
Because it's a global problem and a European problem, even if you did allow a temporary visa, the reality is there's shortages elsewhere in Europe. So firstly, I'm not convinced that lorry drivers would come here. Secondly, morally, is it right that in order for Nando's to have a perfect menu as opposed to missing one or two items, is it right that we actually essentially borrow and steal?
The whole menu is based on chicken. It's not just one or two items.
But come on, the reality is
chicken they couldn't get chicken.
There are 1 million people, Mark, still on furlough. Let's end furlough now. And actually, I think people will get back to work. And I just think businesses are incredibly good at adapting and adjusting. And if there's one or two things a bit short supply over Christmas, it's really not the end of the world. For the most important thing, which is, I think, that actually the lowest paid, the least well off, they are now getting, they've got the negotiating leverage. And I think that's for the nation, for the good of our people and the lowest paid. I think that's really good for the country. I think it's part of what I call the Brexit dividend. And I absolutely stand by it. And so, I can just see, if you grant a temporary visa, Mark, it won't be temporary. There'll always be a reason. We've got to bite the bullet with this, hold firm, and I think it will all, I think it'll resolve itself. I've got great confidence in the innovation and ingenuity of British business leaders who will sort this out.
Final thoughts on this, James?
Yeah, I think he's right in what he says, but if you're a small business, you can't afford to pay people more. And he's talking about employees having more power. That means via the trade unions. Lots of businesses wouldn't necessarily appreciate that. We don't want to go back to the 1970s. I'm certain Richard, as leader of his party, certainly wouldn't want that. But that's what will be the outcome, because people will be pushing for more wages. Small businesses won't be able to compete, and large businesses will cream off workers because they're able to pay them more.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.